The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good afternoon, or good morning, everyone, depending upon where you are. I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and I'd like to welcome you to today's program, How Value-Driven Organizations Gain Visibility as They Scale Agile. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick announcements. Today's program will include Q&A. What we'll be doing this time is we'll be answering questions at the end of every section that the presenter gives, and we'll answer them sort of in the program instead of waiting until they're all sent in at the end. So as you think of a question when you're following along, just send it in, and we'll get to it at the end of every section. Secondly, this is being recorded, so it'll be available on demand, probably starting by tomorrow on the sdtimes.com website. So as we've been reporting in SD Times, organizations large and small are reaping the benefits of speed and quality from using Agile development processes. But these same organizations struggle to bring Agile processes beyond development and into their business and other units. Today's program features speakers from lean Agile software consulting company Net Objective and Target Process, which offers a visual Agile management solution. So to kick things off today is Al Shalloway. He's the CEO at Net Objectives. Al, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Dave, and thanks everybody for being here. I'll be the primary speaker, but Olga's online to answer questions about the tool and things. And what I wanted to speak about, it's kind of interesting. The two of us, Olga and myself, are kind of a representative of the synergy that's occurring between both Net Objectives and Target Process. At Net Objectives, we've been using Lean for well over a decade, and we've been in the Agile space since we began in '99, and Target Process has been created a really good tool for, I guess, 10 years now they've been working. And what attracted me to them, and this is an important part of the session today, which is why I'm talking about it, is that actually tools' main role, and it's a significant role, is to create visibility of the work, the workflow, and feedback and arrangements between people. And when you have that, the tool actually is a reflection of work, like Scrum boards and Kanban boards should be, but often aren't. And all too often, many tools kind of reflect rather a framework, which isn't bad, but it's actually better to have the flexibility of matching the actual work. So what we're going to do today is actually look at this. It's like, how do you integrate lean agile thinking with visual controls? And why is that important? And it actually is extremely important. And a visual control is not just like a general information radiator like we hear about with, Scrum board. It actually tells more. It describes basically what teams are doing and how at scale, how the entire organization is working. And it's an essential ingredient of lean management, because then lean managers don't have to micromanage. They can see what people are doing and they can stay out of their way, and they can see if there are challenges. So it creates an opportunity for management to play their role of creating better ecosystems while the team gets to do what they need to be doing. So it provides the visibility, as I mentioned, of work items, workflow, meaning how are those items moving through the value stream. And what are the work rules? Because those may actually be a problem, or they may be a problem with them. It also can create clarity and consistency of intent across the organization. So we don't have to dogmatically follow something. We can just say, okay, everybody has to have this intention of like how we're presenting information, but they can do it in their own way. So tools can be a very guiding force that is a reflection of how teams are working. Now, a tool integrated with Lean Agile can do even more. Of course, automating manual work, reducing waste is what everybody knows a tool should do. But in addition to that, it can create visibility of information experts use. In other words, the information that experienced people use is something that's out there, but is often not noticed, because we're so used to, when we get into adjusting to Lean Agile, we're so used to actually kind of looking at things the old way we used to, and the information we used to look at. For example, prior to Agile, prior to Lean, you would be thinking that, well, we got to utilize everybody. We talk about it as a resource. People are resources, and we got to make sure they're busy. But that actually works against you. That's not a good idea. So we have to shift our look from utilizing resources to saying, how do we make people effective, and how do you create that information so management can look at that? And the other thing is that this should provide guidance for good decisions. So Good tools, although they are mirroring the work we're doing to get some standardization, also can create awareness of what people should be looking at. And part of our integration is that at Net Objectives, we built what we call a portal that actually has a lot of, well, why do you manage like work in process, or why do you do this? And Target Process actually shows that. And by integrating the two, it's not only how, it's also a why. And that's very important. So what I'm going to do anyway is, we've kind of already done the introduction. We'll do a quick introduction. We have a little poll. We're going to then set the stage. Then I'm going to go through 4 case studies so you can actually see how this works, and then we'll summarize things. Okay. So how do we get teams? How do teams get to good? Okay. So first of all, what we want to recognize is that organizations scale as they get bigger and bigger, as you push things through more, as you push the work more through the entire value stream. The decisions impact more people, and actually understanding the big picture is important, because otherwise you're going to have people working pretty much for themselves or for their own. And we've all seen this, how silos kind of work against each other. Edward Deming, who's kind of created the foundation of systems thinking and somewhat the foundation of Lean, talks about how systems have to be managed. Otherwise, you get, everybody locally optimized and they compete with each other. And we've seen this. I mean, you've seen this. And this is called human nature, by the way. This isn't something you're going to fix your people. Oh, they shouldn't be doing this. No, this is natural. This is, you don't fight human nature, because you ain't going to win that one. So we have to recognize that even though people tend to kind of look at their own stuff first, that if you can create the bigger picture with greater visibility, they'll say, oh, okay, I get it. This is for the company wants, and that's what I'm working for. So that's actually pretty important. So here, we're going to do a poll here. Whoever does the poll, go do it. Okay, we'll just give it another minute. So I don't know if everybody can see it, but it looks like we're hitting a trend. So I'll just read it. It's about 42% saying safe, 2% less, 22% others, and 33% no, not right now. And that's kind of what I've seen in a lot of other places. So let's see. How do I'm going to close the poll. Oh, I could share it just so you can see it. And then I'm going to close it. Numbers changing a little bit, or hide. Okay, good. Okay. So actually, this is a good place for questions, though, if we had a question, since I talked about a couple of things. Or are we good? Okay, I'm going to take 3 seconds of silence is good. So let's set the stage. Let's be clear what we're talking about. Okay. At Net Objectives, although we've done Scrum and actually helped form Lean Kanban University, and we're contributors to SAFe, and we've done all these things, our goal is not to adopt any of those. Our goal is really business agility. And we consider this to be the realization of highest business value in a shorter amount of time. That's the definition for us. How do we get more value out to our customers and to ourselves? Because sometimes they're internal things. And we need to do this in a predictable, sustainable method with high quality. Now, predictability doesn't mean I know exactly what a feature is going to look like. We know from Agile that's just not going to work. But by predictability, the amount of productivity I have, I should get to. And anything in the way of that is actually a problem. It could be high technical debt, making it hard to do. It could be maybe my business stakeholders don't really know what's important, so we've got to figure that out. It could be we're having troubles with the requirements, so we're redoing them. All these things that cause unpredictability are things that are basically challenges then that we need to work on. This is the idea of Lean, is you look to see what's in your way and you go and you fix it. Now, it's also Agile, about inspect and adapt. But Lean talks about it in a way that we find a bit more powerful. And also by working in small delivery increments, you can adjust continuously. We always talk about pivoting. Well, anybody can pivot. The question is, what's the cost of pivoting? So if you have small increments and you can get feedback, small increment, get feedback, small increment, get feedback, when you change direction or adjust, hopefully you're not really changing direction a lot, but you're adjusting, then the cost is low. So that's actually important. Now, a key aspect of Lean Agile is systems thinking. Now, what do I mean by systems thinking? And by that, well, let's go to the opposite of it. That's a picture, kind of a exploded view of a P-51 Mustang. That was a really great combat fighter. in World War II. And by reductionist thinking does not work with complex systems. What we mean by that is you can't take the pieces, put them together. You can't take the best of different things, put them together, and say you've got a system. In this case, you can ask, well, what part of the airplane is responsible for flight? Maybe I'll make that better and I'll fly better. And that's actually kind of sounds like a silly question, because it is a silly question. In other words, if wings give me lift, put more wings on, I'll get more lift. And the answer is no. You've added, the plane is now heavier. The engine doesn't have capacity to get the plane in the air. Oh, well, I added a bigger engine. Then the prop may not be big enough. You get the idea, the interaction of it. So what we want to do is we want to optimize the whole. The system is this collection of parts. We don't localize a piece of it. And this is actually very important, because at scale, where a lot of different parts of a company are interacting with each other, you're going to have a lot of challenges in the actual interactions, more than just the individual pieces. Now, there's another way, and this is a great talk. I highly recommend it. And you'll have the slides, because that's certainly a hard, or just go to Google or search in some way for, what if Russ Akoff gave a TED Talk, and you'll get this. And he talks about it slightly different. I'm just going to take a minute on this, because it's such a great concept, how he talks about it as well. So he says, imagine you get this huge convention center and you put the 50 best cars in the world in there. And then you take these are the 50 best, and you take the best part of each of the 50 cars. Like, who has the best frame, which one has the best engine, which one has the best transmission, which one has the best braking system, whatever it is. And you now take all the best of the best and you put them in a corner. You take them out of the car and you put them in a corner, and now you try to assemble them. And what you've got is a pile of junk. This is system thinking. It's about the relationships between the pieces and how they work together. It's not about optimizing the whole. Now, why is this important at scale? Because at scale, you got all these pieces. And if everybody's just looking how to do their best way to do things, it's a problem. Or look at SAFE, because I saw about 40% of people are doing SAFE. SAFE's a framework, but it has so many roles and things. What sometimes happens is people think, oh, well, I just have to worry about my role. I just have to worry about how I am as a, say, product manager, or how I am as a team. And the answer is no. A lot of those roles are about how do you work together and how do we align. So SAFE needs to be done in a systems thinking point of view. Now, there's another reason for this. Anything you're doing is true, by the way. I just picked on SAFE there for a second because 42% were using it. They're not picked on it, it's just true for everything. Lean has this idea of flow. So here we've got this shower going off to the left. We got all these pipes here. What's important is a blockage anywhere is a blockage everywhere. So the fact is that we want to look at the whole thing. In fact, I had this interesting observation talking to one of my consultants. We were just chatting, and I said, DevOps is great. People are getting into it. But in a lot of ways, DevOps is no less part of the development system. Ops is no less part of the development system than the development system, because if they're blocked there, no value is going out. They just have different aspects of getting value delivered and realized. Okay, so what is this value? Because I'm going to use this concept a lot. And you probably heard the term minimum viable product. It was geared towards startups. This comes from the lean startup, Eric Ries. And as I like to say, because it's true, the only thing I don't like about Eric is he explains things better than I do. The guy's just brilliant. And his books are brilliant. He's got a couple of them now. But the MVP is geared towards startups. It's like the first time you have a product or service, and it's usually built by a small team that can readily pivot and is aligned. And a lot of that is in the context. Now, I'm not saying you can't use the MVP in a large organization. You absolutely can. SAFE actually integrates it in. But you've got to remember where it's coming from and what it's intended to do, which is basically to define like an hypothesis. Is this going to work or not work? Okay. So the question is, what do you do when you're in an established company? It's an enhancement to an existing product or service. The teams required to build it are not aligned. This is actually a little bit different. And there's a term that came from Denny and Cleland Wang's Software by Numbers. It's about 10 years old at least, called a minimum marketable feature, which, by the way, is not the same thing as an MMF and SAFE. They're kind of different. But in any event, in MMF, a minimum marketable feature was what's the smallest thing I could market, like some feature capacity. And we used that term back around 2006, and we always had troubles with it because people would say, well, we don't market, we don't have features. We tried actually MVP at one point too. They said, well, we don't have a product or IT. So, well, the real thing we're talking about is what's the smallest business increment. And so it's the smallest business increment. It's the minimum amount of business value that can be built, deployed, and consumed that makes sense from a business perspective. Now, I got to explain this a little bit, because in Agile, everybody's talking about it's always the customer, it's always the customer. And the answer is yes. That's what the business does from a value point of view. They're focused on the customer, but they also sometimes do things internally. So the business perspective may be how we add value to the customer. Which customer are we talking about is an aspect of this. I may say, oh, well, we got this big chunk, but we're going to deal with these customers first because they're our $1 million client. We want to take care of them. We're not focusing on value to the other clients. So it's important to realize it's a business decision as to what market you go after. And that's part of the MBI. I might slice it down and things like that. It also may be that it's expensive to release. So I might be able to get this done, but maybe if I release it every week or whatever, now it may be easy for the developers to release continuously, but what am I doing to my marketing and support teams? Well, they should be able to keep up, but maybe they can't. It's a consideration for the business that we have to look at. It must contain all that is needed for value realization. In other words, software development, software by itself is not useful. It's how it's used. And if you have something out there and nobody knows about it, it doesn't have any value to it. So what are all these other pieces? Again, we're talking about a business increment because it's how does it make difference to the business by adding value to the customer or supporting the business. By the way, you will hear this. An MBI is not a reason to deliver less. It's a reason to deliver sooner. In other words, the way these fit in our approach is we figure out what the company wants to invest in, what are the strategies, what are the initiatives, what are the business increments that they want, and then how do we incrementally deliver those. So instead of getting it in 6 months, maybe they get half of it in 3 months. It provides something to align around as well. Lean portfolio management, which I'm not going to be talking about today, but that gives you a, excuse me. Oh, this is the smallest thing. Sorry, need water. Oh, this is the smallest thing I can get out. Then I shouldn't work on something of less importance, so I can get some alignment about what's most important. Okay, pause for questions again. Okay, people are either asleep or I'm really lucid today. Okay, great. Aligning shared services to business value. So this turns out to actually illustrate a little bit of the use of MBIs, but it also illustrates the case study this comes from is Northwestern Mutual, where we implemented SAFE about almost 6 years ago. And I'll get to that part at the end. Not all of this was done at Northwestern. I'll explain it. So how do you use MBIs? And then how do you track this in target process is the question. Okay, so the first thing is you want to define what are my offerings. And these are kind of vague. Maybe we call these epics, solutions, depending how you want to think about it. This is what we're going to be offering our customers. And now from this, we start creating minimum business increments. And how you do it, I'm showing it as this nice sequence. But in reality, the way this often happens is you'll investigate these offerings, you'll get some features, you'll kind of talk a lot about it. But at some point, you'll either get features and combine them up to MBIs, or you'll start out with the MBIs by saying this is the offering and this is the first thing I can deliver. How you do it depends a little bit on the company, depends a little bit on the product managers. But we have this now list. These are things we want. These are the MBIs. And what we can do is sequence them, okay? And we sequence them, the MBIs, and you'll notice how I've, sorry, went too far. Notice how the MBIs here, these right here, are now ordered. Now, how do we sequence the MBIs? Well, this is where this thing called weighted shortest job first is useful. And basically, it says how much value will I get? And as it's delayed, what will be the cost of that delay? So if I'm going to get, say, $200,000 in value a month, when I get it, if it takes me 3 months to build it, or it's 3 months before I have it available, that's 3 times 200,000 or 600,000. But of course, that's not necessarily, you can't just rank those numbers, because I might have something that'll just take a month to get done, and maybe it's going to give me 300,000. So the cost of delay of that's only 300,000, but it's only a month. So you actually have to look at what's the cost of delay, what's the cost I'm losing by not having it, and what's the cost in a sense of getting it. Now, SAFE talks about it as cost, but it really should all be done according to time. And in another webinar, I'm sure we haven't scheduled one, but now as I'm talking, I think people would be interested in this, is we don't just talk about business value. We like to do it in a little bit more sophisticated way. How do you figure out what business value across an enterprise or across portfolios are? So there's a whole wealth of information there on how to do it. We don't have time today. It's not part of the topic, but this is also something we're collaborating. When I say we, Net Objectives has been doing an approach here for like 10 years, and now we're putting this into target process. It's what's actually got me very excited about this synergy between the two companies. As we get ideas, we can put them in a tool. People understand it a lot better. They're a bit more advanced. Okay, anyway, coming down here, we've defined our business offerings. We've created our MBIs. We've sequenced the MBIs. We create our features. And now when I say assign to the team backlog, teams are still going to pull when they're able, but like who's got them? And assign or decided on, don't get hung up on that word. But eventually the teams now know what they do. Now, if you're doing SAFe, this could all happen in the planning event, which means already, notice we're shifting the planning event a little bit. In a planning event, a lot of times people are looking at the features and they sort out the weighted shortest job first, or hopefully that's already been done. But what we're suggesting, if you have something like an MBI up at the top, and you could even think about it like we have milestones in SAFe as things at the top. We can also think about it as, well, this is something I'm trying to get out as soon as possible, and this is the order they're in. So we can think of this as a milestone driven by the order value. Anyway, at some point, we've got all of the stories at the team. And of course, teams, some noise change. Okay. And for some teams, request things from shared services. So this bottom layer, and the reason I'm showing it this way, very often shared service stuff, while a lot of it will come out in the planning event, a lot of it just happens because it's as we get deeper into things, more things happen. Okay, so anyway, let me just actually explain what we did at Northwestern Mutual. Because Northwestern, when we went in there, even though we had the portfolio and the program level worked out, that wasn't really what they were interested in. They were interested in kind of the program, the essential SAFe piece. So that's where we started because that's what they wanted. We, of course, had program product managers and all that oriented. But the thing that actually really worked at the Northwestern Mutual SAFe case study, and we have, ironically, SAI, Scaled Agile Inc., who, promotes SAFe, put their version of the case study, and I shouldn't say their version and our version, but their perspective from Northwestern and our perspective as a consulting company. It was interesting that when we looked at how they were working, we saw that shared services was going to be the big block. Remember that flow of the pipeline? We were thinking, this is back in 2012 when they didn't really have Kanban at shared services. I was saying, this is going to work really great at the teams, and then they're going to be stuck with things like business intelligence and certain reports they needed and some other things. And we worked with a shared services team, implemented a Kanban system so they could take requests as were needed in a quick manner and basically unblock things. And the way they decided to do this was based up on the top priorities that unfortunately they kind of had to imagine because it wasn't done by the top portfolio level. But just actually attending to it, just by knowing that they needed to focus on getting something done, made a huge impact and had a big thing on the system. Now, the way to think about this is you never lose context. We had like strategies, initiatives, business increments. This is what I mentioned. And this is the key. You need this visibility. So in target process, and I'm not going to go through the report in detail. If there are questions people have, they could ask on the question box, and Olga or Kenzie will take a look. The intention here of this webinar is to show you what Lean Agile is looking at, and that in fact it's possible to duplicate that and mirror the Lean Agile concepts in a tool. And here's a screenshot for it. But if you really want in depth, and we'll have contact information at the very end, you should contact Target Process and see exactly how they do that. Or if you've got another tool you're already happy with, make sure they have this because they should. Sometimes they don't. Okay. So, questions? Okay. So the level of work in process at each level. And I don't know, it just seems that work in process often gets a little misunderstood. And let's do an example here. So we hear a lot about work in process. And what work in process means is how much work is going on, how much is in play. Some people call it work in progress. But the original frame discussion, rather, the original framing was work in process. And the reason I prefer process is because it may be in process but not going anywhere. I mean, work in progress sounds like I'm progressing on it. And sometimes what happens is when something gets blocked, like maybe I start this big business increment and it gets stopped because I get something else. Well, it's not moving forward, but it's still been opened. It's still kind of congesting my pipeline. So we want to keep it present. So when we look at Kanban boards, we often look at a Kanban board and we see that, and a Kanban board is, again, like a Scrum board, except it shows a little bit more explicit what the workflow is. And what we see is that, oh, the team is only working on 5 things here, and the team is only working on 4 things here, or this step. But you got to make sure you see that, well, we opened 5 features and 2 aren't going anywhere because we're multitasking and working on too many things. So work in process is not just the number of like stories I'm working on at the moment, but it's the number of features that those stories are a part of, or the number of business increments, minimum business increments that those features are a part of. So one of the things, and those of you who've had any safe training, I'm sure you've seen this diagram, which actually comes from Don Reinertson, whom I am in love with. He's just the best lean guy I know. The question is, what happens if you work serially? Like, let's say I got one team and I do A, B, and C. And I say, I'm just going to do A, and then I'm going to do B, and then I'm going to do C. Now, the real idea here is I'm not so much managing my work in process as much as I'm focusing on finishing. If A is more important than B, then I should finish A before I start on B, unless I have people where doing B won't slow A down at all. Because this is the idea. Don't slow A down. If you've got people who aren't busy and they could do B without slowing A down and they could get it done, then you can start them. But I'll get value right after a month or whatever that time increment is by doing this. Whereas if I work on all 3 simultaneously, you'll notice it's a little bit further to the right, not just due to multitasking, but because I work on something for a couple of days, I then go to something else for a couple of days, and I come back. Even if I'm not multitasking, I'll forget. But in any event, I get all this value later. So how do you see this? Since what we normally see is people busy at a computer or, their Scrum boards or their whatever team board they have, one way to see this is to show the board. Now, in this case, the blue represents MBIs, and you can see that, oh, I'm getting these done. Whereas if we work in parallel, the things are off to the right. So this is an example of where a tool can be very useful, and it's something also where our portal can be very useful to say, look, when you look at this report that shows how are things progressing through the system, make sure that you're not doing everything at the end of the program increment, or however you're managing your cadence. Anybody who's done Scrum, there's a common phenomenon that happens to almost everybody, because this isn't pointed out, unfortunately. I don't know that people need to reinvent or rediscover problems. We pretty much know what people are going to hit, but there are people who think, well, the teams need to discover it themselves. And I'm like thinking, no, they can discover new things that are about how they work. But the thing that most teams seem to discover all the time on their own is that at the end of a sprint, almost all the stories are done, but none of them are all the way done. And we want to avoid that. Same way here at the end of a planning event, we want to make sure not everything is almost done. We want to get things during the 2-3 months or whatever we're working on. We want to make sure that we're getting things available. Now, we may not release them. We may block them up, but notice if I finish something quickly and, if I finish something quickly and I'm done ahead of time, I'm lowering the risk. If I have like 5 MBIs I want to get in a 3-month period and I get them all almost done the last sprint and I run out of time, I don't get any value. If I've got 4 of them done before I get to the last sprint, then I'm guaranteed, even with a delay, I'll be good. Okay. Now, there's another related question to this, which is, do you know what people are working on? And I'm not going to go through this slide, but you can see on the right, there's whole bunches of stuff. You want a tool that lets you know what people are working on, because they may not be working on the best thing, or there may be problems. And this is, again, the visual control. I can see what's happening. You also want to see what your waste in the workflow is. Where are delays? So I know it's very common in Lean to talk about eliminate waste. But you know what? We're not manufacturing. We're not even in the physical world. We can't see our work. Imagine what a developer looks like when she's writing good code. Okay, how you would watch her on a computer screen, or now watch her how she's putting bugs into the system. It looks the same. I'm being facetious, of course. The point is, when a bumper falls off a car in manufacturing, you see it. When somebody puts a bug in the code, and even though devs talk about bugs like they showed up, they actually do put them in there. And I'm speaking from past experience here. I started development back in 1970 when I started university. But the point is that waste is kind of a red herring. It's the wrong thing to look at. It's delays. Delays cause waste. So what we want is a report that reflects wasted time based on that we have delays in our workflow. And that's one of the essences of Lean. Okay, great. So I'm ready for another one, but questions first. Okay. This is a different example. This happened, this was like 2005, 2006. Beginner's luck, I don't know, but this was the very first Lean course I taught, and it was a 2-day class. And in the class, one of the things we did is we did value stream mapping. And there were 2 people that I remember. There were more than 2 people in the class, but I really remember these 2 because something extraordinary happened. They were from a best-of-breed web developer. They were a quickly growing company. They had all the business they could handle, and they were pretty much hiring and hiring and hiring. And they knew they had a problem in the development, but until they hit 100 people, they just hired more people. And now they realize that they couldn't keep hiring. There's something about companies that hit about 100 that is difficult to manage. There's actually a term called Dunbars Number, which is 125, which is like once you get around that spot, it's not quite the community it was before. So they had actually come to this class, and it's interesting who they sent to the class. They had the manager of project managers. They weren't really doing Agile by any means, really, but they were little small projects, so they were kind of in that sense that they weren't this really big one project. They had little teams doing things. So they had the manager of the project managers, and they had the director of development there. Obviously, they got some development problem. And one of the things we did was a value stream map. And I'm going to point this out here. What we noticed is that there was sales. So like sales would initiate talk with a client, and then whatever sales did next, and then whatever sales did next. And then it would get into development, and it'd be deployed. And then about 5% of the time, deployment would run into a problem, and they'd have to go back through development. And these queues represented big weights. So we had a big weight to do development, a big weight to do deployment. And the reason was that this going back, this going back when they deployed it and it blew up, they'd take their lead guy and he'd have to go fix it. So it slowed development down because their lead guy wasn't there. It would obviously slow deployment down. And now it looks like a development problem. It sure did. But a good technique in Lean is what's called 5 whys. And this is a way to help us find out what's the problem. So ignore that comment about value streams and Kanban boards. I'll mention that in a minute. Meant to put animation on it. Anyway, so 5 whys, what you do is you ask why, 5, maybe 4, maybe 6. Usually it's about 5 plus or minus 1. So we were saying, why are we having to rework the system? So I asked them that, and they said, well, the programs don't function on the customer servers. I said, well, why do they not function properly on the customer servers? They said, yeah, the code was designed one way, the servers are configured for another way. They were thinking we could make more robust code and all that. Well, why are our customer servers being configured differently from how it was expected? Well, the customers are not following the guidelines for server configurations. I said, well, why that? Weren't being told. They weren't being told. Why aren't they being told? I mean, this literally, I don't know verbatim, but this is pretty much the conversation. Because sales, who's supposed to make sure they know of this configuration requirement, isn't telling them. Now, I've done a lot of sales, and I knew the answer to this before they said it. But when you've got a sale, you don't say, oh, by the way, I love take your money. But you know what? Before I will take your money, you have to promise me you will configure your servers. So what the salespeople were doing is they were literally burying this requirement in the contract. And of course, the people who signed the contract aren't the people who have anything to do with the servers, so it wasn't happening. So what happened is literally this like took 2 days, for them to understand Lean and do value stream mapping. What these 2 people did is they went back, because I met them about a year later at actually somebody else from the same company came to another lean course about a year later. And I said, hey, what happened, guys? Because they didn't pull me in, so I'm not taking credit for this. They said, well, we went back and we talked to sales and we talked to them about our value stream map and this problem we had. And we all agreed that salespeople would not get paid until after a successful deployment, not when the sale was made. See, it's making the salespeople look at the big picture. It's looking at all the different pieces. See, here we were, again, remember I started out talking about lean thinking, systems thinking. Sales was impacting deployment. Now, the reason I said value streams and Kanban boards are related is you can see that value stream map I've got there. But you can imagine how that'd be kind of painful to have that all the time. Oh man, I got to do a value stream map, then we change how we work. We got to update the value stream map. No way, I'm not going to do all this. It's too much work. But if you think about this, I got these different steps. This is actually can be represented as a series of steps as we represent here in target process. So this was an insight I had, and I'll show you later in the summary. It's kind of obvious to me now, but I'll admit it's one of those, a lot of things look obvious after you've seen them. But literally, this is one of the nice things I think about target process is that you can lay out the what you're doing in any sequence that reflects the work. So we're not saying people follow this, but we're saying that this is a reflection of what people are doing, and we can see this. And we can also get a report that tells us when we have large queues, like I'm ready for development, ready for deployment, but they're really big. So I said, well, why are those so big? What's wrong here? Well, what do I do about that? So this is, again, where the integration is good because we explain what that means and we explain different ways to do mapping to see about it. So you're not just following a tool and looking at reports, but you're actually getting information that someone like me, I'm not smarter than people, but I've been around a while. I know what to look for. I know what I want to look for because I've got 20 years experience in Agile. And I want that available in any tool, and it is. That's not there already. That's what we're working on to put in. So this is actually an important thing. In other words, a lot of the things you would actually take a long time to figure out to be looking at, target process is presenting for you, and then we actually help you use that information by combining it with information on our information portal. To me, this is pretty exciting. Because what this means is we can take advantage of frameworks, but use them as tools as an initial guidance, but we can actually be led by we can be directly led by the principles on which the frameworks were built. Remember I said one size doesn't fit all. This is perhaps maybe the binding between me and one of Target Process's CEO, Andre. As he says, it's one size doesn't fit all is in our DNA. That's been in my DNA for a very long time. We're interested in a solution that fits the customer. Okay, notice how, by the way, I should have put this up there before. These are the cues. These are the when work is waiting. We want to lower when work is waiting. The problem in software development and a common misunderstanding of lean is not about going faster. Lean is about eliminating the wait in the steps. So we want to work on eliminating the cues by creating visibility, by having things work together. We're not trying to go faster when we actually do the work. Okay, so here's another poll, and you all go for it. I'm going to set up somebody start it. We still got the old one up. There we go. So, well, you can read it. So just fill it out. Oh, this is interesting. Give it another minute and I'll talk about these because this is, again, a lot of this is, I want to talk about the visibility of things. And I want to mention something I'm not talking about today, but I'll just kind of mention it quickly. So removing department silos to see true status. Notice that's a visibility issue. Connecting strategic initiatives. I mean, first one is a visibility issue across the organization physically and managerially. Connecting strategic initiatives to tactical work. Again, a visibility issue. You're trying, again, this is why we came up with the MBI concept. That is a thing that's a container of all the pieces needed. So if you want to think, if you're in SAFe, you can think of this as a container of the MVP that's needed to test the hypothesis of the solution that you're using to see what the business offering is, as the MMF or the UX as they use it, whatever it is. It's a nice container, and now I've got visibility that this is what's important, okay? And what's interesting is you can use an MBI regardless of the scale or the number of levels you use in SAFe, which is actually very important, because even if you're doing just essential SAFe, you want to make sure you have this visibility. Then reporting on work in process and identifying risks and blockers. Well, that's obvious how that's been done. I've already shown you that. And implementing enterprise portfolio management. Okay, so how do we do these? I'm going to spend 2 minutes on these, even though they're not really part of the webinar. We'll have to do a follow-up on. But the implementing enterprise portfolio management, there are 2 levels of that. There's portfolio management, and then there's enterprise portfolio management. So if I'm at the portfolio level, obviously the stakeholders within the portfolio, you've got to get them to understand what's more important. And this is, again, where an MBI is important, because if 2 people are in the phenomenon of what I call get while the getting is good, and it's funny how I think you already know what I'm talking about. You know, I got budget, I want all this. And then what's worse is I got another person saying, I got budget, I want all this. This is what we call the many-headed monster. If they can't agree to what's really important, if you can't actually say, what are the values that we're investing in to get, like a financial company might say, well, we want to retain assets because that's where we earn money. We want to lower our costs. We want to be compliant. We want to improve the customer experience. We want to improve our own internal development. Those are the 5 things we're going to spend money on. And then you might have different weighting of those. If you can't get that conversation, you really can't get the many-headed monster where different people are saying different things done. And then what you have to do is take that to the strategies, the initiatives, and then, by the way, I got an MBI. What is the MBI working on? What are those 5 things? How do we evaluate it? And then I could actually do a weighted shortest job first. I mentioned business value before, but now I could do a weighted shortest job first based on the 5 things that our company has agreed to is where we're investing. And maybe we'll let you get away with 6, but typically 5's enough, and 4 might be enough. Okay. The others, by the way, would be interesting if you would just if you wanted to put that in the question so we can just see what they are, that'd be great. Okay. So continuing on, and time for questions.
Yes, El, we have several questions. First of them is, what's an MBI? And could you explain where MBIs come from? Who is defining them?
Okay, so good question. So the MBI, again, is minimum business increment, and it is the smallest chunk of business value that we could deliver that, I mean, it's just like, what's the smallest thing we could deliver that people can actually realize value for? So if you're a startup company, possibly it would be something in, you know, where it's like an MVP at a startup is at. It's what's the smallest chunk of value? So where do they come from? So let's say a product owner or a business stakeholder says, we want this, there's some data entry screen. We're having some new capability to check, say, my bank records, if I'm a financial company. And we want to build this ability to check our own, you know, customers' bank records. And we say to ourselves, okay, well, that's going to be a big project. But, well, you know, these type of customers, we have these like really elite customers, and we want to do this checking for them first. So we could say, well, we've got to get this whole thing done. But if we just limit it to these type of companies and ask what they want, then instead of taking like a whole 6 months, I can take that 6-month project and deliver some in a couple of months. So this is a key aspect. Now, if you're doing SAFe, because I know a lot of people are, they actually talk about how to make thinner slices of epics. And I think it's like number 6, you know, look at your customer base or things like that. But in our view, this is how you slice things up. In other words, product owners should be looking at what's the smallest sliver of value I could deliver instead of how much can I jam in. So it's how do I deliver value quickly, and you get it by going smaller. Okay, Olga, another one?
For Agile project management, should we still use the MS project to illustrate the work break-in structure? And what Agile software are you using in this example of the feature value stream?
Okay, so let me answer the first question. I'll need you to repeat the second question. So the work breakdown structure is actually not a bad technique because it shows everything that's there. So in some sense, I would say, yes, you need to look at the work breakdown structure because, hang on one second. Okay. there's just some noise outside that's not muted, so I'm moving. Okay, so the work breakdown structure, the real intent of a work breakdown structure is actually to make sure that all your work is visible. So how you make all your work visible could be a work breakdown structure or could be another way. And I actually showed you a couple of tools in Target Process, reports in Target Process that help that. So what was the second part of that question, Olga? Can you all hear me?
Al, the second part of the question was which Agile software were you using in that example?
Oh, in
that last section.
In this one, we weren't using any software. In this example, the 5 whys. Yeah, no, we just did this by hand.
No, I believe the question is about the tool you are using screenshots from, and it's.
Oh, these are Target Process tools.
Yes. Okay, and one more question related to the previous section. Please give us an example of a project that can be done in phases and at the same time reap its benefits. If building an app, we won't see the benefits until the entire app is built.
Okay.
Please provide an example.
So I have almost never seen a project of that type, but there are some. For example, if you're building a flight control system for an airplane, you can't say, well, we'll get it to turn left in a month, come back later, we'll get it to turn right. But the question is do you really need it all? I mean, are you building something that every customer needs every piece of this? That's rare. Now, I'm not saying it's not true for you because it happens. But the example I gave, again, was if I'm writing a data input method for customer information, then do I need to do this globally? If I'm a global company, I could just do it for like English, or I can do it for Europe, or I can do it for Canada. I can do it for different things. The question to ask yourself is, instead of looking to me, is look at the project you're thinking about and ask yourself, is there a select number of customers? Is there some group of customers that if I were to look at and I gave them built things only for that customer, would I be able to give them something? I'll give one example that actually isn't even software. In fact, when it was first done, this was for a manufacturing supply chain IT organization, which is actually a very difficult problem. And one of the guys there who was in charge of the laying out of when they got a new manufacturing place, he says, well, I don't see how I can use MBIs. I'm building a factory, and the factory basically I can't, until the whole thing's done, I can't get anything out of it. So I said, okay, well, let's talk about it. What do you do when you build a factory? And he says, well, part of what I do is I get the floor plan laid out to see where the equipment is, and then I go and I order the equipment, and then I put the equipment in, and he says, okay, and what you're doing now is you're planning the whole thing out, getting the whole thing planned and worked on, and that takes you a few months, and then you go and do it. And he said, yeah, that's pretty much what we do. I says, well, let me ask you this. Is it possible? I mean, would it be desirable? I didn't know anything about factories. I know a lot about MSCIT, but not actually doing the factories. I said, you said the first step you do is you look at the factory and you get the big layout. And I said, could you actually do that, complete that, focus on that, and then actually know how and what type of equipment you're going to get, and then do the next phase and go through it a phase that those 5 things you gave me, they obviously relate to each other, but you need to know every detail about all of them before you get the first one done. He said, no, actually, if I've done this enough, I go into a factory floor and I can see where things are. I know how to lay it out, and then I could get the equipment that kind of works best within that context. So I said, well, why don't you do that? And he said, well, I don't know why. We'll do that next time. So that's another way. You just look at what value can I build and deliver quicker. But now let me even take the case when you can't actually release it, because I've worked on projects like that too, where you can only release it at the end of the year because the customers didn't want to do maintenance. You could build it in stages and give them some value, but they didn't want to reconfigure it. Even there's value in going a little faster because you want to at least validate your risk. Okay, so we're good. We got some questions, but I'm gonna have to move forward so I can at least finish the presentation, and then we might have some time at the end. And we're in pretty good shape, though, I think. But I want to talk about, and by the way, if any of you are coming to the SAFE Summit or going to the SAFE Summit, we're going to be displaying both target process and what I'm about to show you here. A lot of people use the planning event of SAFE, whether they're doing SAFE or not. And this is a program increment planning event board, and the blues represent MBIs and the greens features, and we're trying to make it look like that. And what's nice though is, the thing about it is we're not just trying to create a map. We're trying to create this is where a tool can be quite useful. What we find is these reds here actually indicate that I have a dependency in this story to that story. And the red means that I've got the dependency, but these people haven't promised the answer. So we talk sometimes about, I got a dependency, but we have to make sure that actually you've got an agreement to do it. And the nice thing about creating this visibility, aside from the fact that we know we have to get this agreement, if you've got shared services, you might make the convention, in fact, we recommend this, is actually not commit early on, because the shared services, they just get dribs and drabs as throughout the event. We don't really want to make a commitment based on first in, first out. We want to make it based on what the MBIs that are needed. It's also nice to be able to say, hey, I just want to see what's going on for a team. So this is really important, because otherwise, if you look at this, and real boards are so convoluted, they're just kind of complicated. But if you could say, well, I'm the crows and I want to see what relates just to me, that's pretty cool. So this is another thing tools can do. And again, this program board is in target process. Here's a screenshot for it. And what's also cool about tools that do the planning event nicely is it creates the ability to do remote events. Now, I'm not really suggesting you do remote events. I love everybody together in the planning room, but sometimes that's prohibitively expensive. So we suggest, I don't care how expensive it is the first time, have everybody there. But then after that, maybe you can use the planning event in a remote way where you bring leaders in, like I've got here for this team. And what we have is what we call like collaboration through automation. We can have new practices like the defer commitment thing. We can change the I need to we agree. In other words, I'm not just saying I need this by when, I'm actually saying, and you've agreed to it. So then if you see, a promise really means that I'm saying I will do this as long as it's within my control. And if I can't get it done, then I will talk to you about it. So this is a different way of actually collaborating and working with each other. And the dependency management board, you could do this available 24/7. I could see my dependencies at any time. Okay, so a summary. Or are there other questions that are really pertinent? Maybe I'll just finish and then we'll take some others. Okay. So again, I've been actually consulting a little longer than 20 years, but I should say Agile consulting maybe. But the toughest thing is to get people to look at the right information. Guiding them on how to use it is relatively simple. It's getting people to look at the effect of interruptions. It's the effect of putting people solidly booked with no extra time. Complete solutions provide the right information, point out how this is used to make decisions, provide options for the decisions. This is what a tool like Target Process can do, aligned with what we know how to do from a lean agile point of view. Now, I'm going to go through this quickly, but this is very important to realize. People talk about what's management's role. We talk about culture. And this comes from David Mann, Creating a Lean Culture. And he talks about culture is important, but changing it directly is not possible. It's no more likely a target than the air we breathe. It's not something we can target for change. It's an idea arising from experience. That is, our idea of culture of a place or organization is a result of what we experience there. In this way, a company's culture is a result of how people collaborate with each other. Think about this for a minute. If you're in a company where when somebody makes a mistake, they get really attacked, well, your culture is it's not safe. Why? Because somebody did something, they made a mistake, they got attacked. See, culture is critical, but you have to change your method of collaboration. You have to change how people interact with each other. You've got to focus on agreements, behaviors, specific expectations, tools, and routine practices. Lean systems make this easier because in Lean, what we do is we focus on the environment. In this case, we use the tool because they emphasize our agreements. Remember in the program board, we're agreeing that we're getting this dependency done. I'm not just telling you got to do it, and then later you'll come back to me and say, sorry, didn't have time, which I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. Visual controls, every one of the process reports I've shown you have been, well, not all of them, some of them were a status of where they were, but those that showed kind of flow were what we called a visual control. It's a very particular type of information radiator that not only tells you what the status of the work is, it tells you how the work is being done, and this enables management to actually improve the environment, and this is very critical. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. This is what we call visual controls across the enterprise. And this happened, I don't know, like 8-9 years ago. I was at a client, and at that stage, I was really gung-ho about value stream maps. And I had done dozens at that point, and I had never had a problem teaching a value stream map to a company. And for whatever reason, I was having troubles with these people. So we decided to say, well, let's just use Kanban boards because they can understand that. So we made one board. We got all the managers, all the directors, basically, in the room, and we came up with what are the system capabilities we want. We had a little like flow diagram or flow, like a board that said things come at the front and then they go here. And then we made our MBIs and we identified dependencies with the system architect being there. And then we said, okay, these all go to the team. So like those first two were on one wall, all the team boards were on another wall. We literally put these up on the walls, big flip charts, and then saw how they integrated back and deployed. It was around 2007 we did this. And you could literally stand around the room and you could see the flow of work. Remember that pipeline we had with the shower? Because I get stuck any one of these places, I'm stuck everywhere. So if I look at this, it's important to see all these, and it's important to see how these relate in your system. Again, something that target process can do, where now we don't have everything blown up. Right here, what we've done is we've blown up the Team D board, but we have all the different pieces here. So it's because otherwise you need a screen about 5 feet long, maybe 10 feet long. But you get the idea that part of what you want is the ability to see any stage of the work. And this is actually pretty critical. Okay, so we still have 2 minutes left, 1 minute left for questions. And by the way, if you've got a question about the Lean Agile approach we've done, or say for something like that, contact me. If you've got something about target process, contact Olga. We didn't have we answered a lot of questions in the middle. Olga, we got a minute for at least one question. So pick the one you like best and let me handle that. And then we'll take a break.
Mm-hmm. So the interesting question is, if multiple teams are working in concert on different components of an incremental feature, but one or more teams is not making their sprint goals, how does one mitigate the situation?
Very good. So that's going to happen. Some teams get behind and all that. So the question is why? Why are they not meeting their sprint goals? Is it because they misestimated? Then why would that be? Is it because they're not meeting their sprint goals because of dependencies? Hey, I'm a consultant, so my favorite 2 words are it depends. What you want to do is look at that cost, okay? Now, if you can actually have the other teams help that team, I would do that, because the goal isn't for the teams individually, the goal is for the whole picture. Now, there are other ways to ask the question, why are we not meeting sprint goals? And I'll give you my answer to that all the time. This doesn't depend. When you're getting individual or team level training, you need initially, and if you've already had your initial training and you haven't gotten it yet, you need acceptance test driven development training. And if you've got testers that aren't with the developers, you need it even more. One of the things that has gotten lost, and I'll admit I'm a little bit on a soapbox here, one of the things that have gotten lost in the last 20 years of Agile, because I've been doing it that long, since 99 anyway, almost 20 years, is that Agile is actually doing the work itself and the way you be. Scrum and SAFe are not the same as Agile. They are methods to get to Agile. Things like, how do I identify what I work on? How do I slice it down? How do I collaborate by getting tests defined before I do my work? That's collaboration. That's Agile. So my suggestion is the way you can get some consistency and predictability is to learn acceptance test driven development that gets product owners, developers, and teams. And be very careful. This is a course that has better have a team, the product owner, and the team includes developers and testers. If you send a couple people to an ATDD class, it is not an ATDD class. All they're teaching them is how to write stories at a time. A real ATDD class is about collaboration. Okay, I know we've run out of time, so Dave, I'm going to hand it back to you. Please do ask me questions, though, as they come to you with that email. I'd appreciate it.
Very good. Thanks, Al. That was a great presentation. Once again, thank you, Al Shalloway, Net Objectives, and thank you, Target Process, for sponsoring this event today. And I would also like to thank the attendees for being with us and giving us their time. So until next time, I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times. So long.